This is the White Raven. If you ever hear your own voice coming from an empty room, don't answer, because by the time you hear it, something may already be speaking through you. Lucas walked to the sound of his own voice. If you're hearing this, I'm already inside your house. His eyes opened. Darkness. For several seconds, he didn't move. He couldn't remember falling asleep. He couldn't remember returning to the repair shop. The last thing he remembered was room 18, the door, the thing wearing his face. Then, I'm already inside your house. The voice came again. Lucas sat up. The antique radio was sitting on the workbench. Its dial glowed faintly. 2:13 a.m. He stared at it. No. The radio continued. Don't look behind you. Lucas froze. His breathing stopped. There was something behind him. He could hear it breathing, slowly, deeply. Then the radio whispered, I told you not to look. Lucas shut his eyes. The breathing stopped. He waited. 10 seconds. 20. Nothing. Finally, he turned. Nobody. The workshop was empty. Lucas laughed nervously. Then he noticed the recording device sitting beside the radio. It was turned on. The red indicator was blinking. He hadn't switched it on. Lucas grabbed the recorder. He pressed stop. Then he played it back. At first, there was only static. Then his voice. If you're hearing this, Lucas frowned. The recording continued. I'm already inside your house. His own voice sounded frightened, but there was something wrong with it. It didn't sound like a recording. It sounded like Lucas was speaking directly into his ear. Then came a second voice, a whisper. He's going to wake up soon. Lucas stopped the recording. His hands were shaking. He replayed the final few seconds. The whisper came again. He's going to wake up soon. Lucas stared at the recorder. Who? Static. Then the answer. You. Lucas left the workshop. He drove straight to his apartment. He needed to see if anything had changed. The apartment looked normal. Too normal. His photographs were still on the wall. His books were still on the shelf. His keys were on the kitchen counter. But something felt wrong. Lucas walked toward the hallway. Room 18 was gone. The wall was solid again. He touched it. Cold. He sighed with relief. Maybe it was over. Then he noticed the photograph. A family photograph from when Lucas was 8 years old. His mother stood beside him. His father stood behind them. Lucas stared at the picture. There was someone else in it. A tall man stood in the background. His face was hidden by a shadow. Lucas brought the photograph closer. He had never seen the man before. Then he noticed something that made his stomach turn. The man was wearing the exact same shirt Lucas was wearing now. Lucas dropped the photograph. He spent the afternoon searching through old records. The name Daniel Mercer kept appearing. The missing radio technician. The man whose voice had first come through the antique radio. Lucas eventually found an old newspaper archive. Local radio station destroyed by fire. 23 dead. Below the headline was a photograph of the station. Lucas stared at it. The building looked familiar. Not because he had seen it in the newspaper, because he had seen it before. In his dreams, he zoomed in on the photograph. There was a small door at the back of the station. Above it was a number. 18. Lucas stopped breathing. He searched the address. The station had been demolished after the fire, but the address still existed. Only now, there was a motel there. The same motel Lucas had stayed. He drove there before sunset. The motel looked abandoned. No neon sign, no cars, no clerk, no guests. Just an empty building beneath a gray sky. Lucas entered through the front doors. The lobby smelled of dust and damp wood. He walked toward the desk. The old clerk was sitting there, exactly as before. Lucas stopped. You knew this place was the radio station. The clerk looked up. I've known that for a long time. Who's Daniel Mercer? The old man's expression changed. You've been hearing him. Yes. Then you already know. No, I don't. The clerk leaned forward. Daniel Mercer didn't die in the fire. Lucas stared at him. He survived. Then, where is he? The clerk pointed toward the staircase. Lucas looked up. The stairs disappeared into darkness. He never left. Lucas whispered, Room 18. The clerk nodded. But that's not the worst part. Lucas waited. The old man whispered, Daniel wasn't the one broadcasting. Lucas felt cold. Then, who was? The clerk looked directly at him. You. Lucas stepped backward. That's impossible. The clerk shook his head. You've been here before. No, you've been here many times. I've never seen this place before. The clerk smiled sadly. You just don't remember. Then he placed an old cassette recorder on the counter. A label was attached to it. Lucas, 1989. Lucas stared at the date. That's impossible. Listen. Lucas pressed play. Static filled the lobby. Then a young voice spoke. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Lucas recognized his voice. His own, but younger, much younger. Then Another voice. This is Lucas, broadcasting from WCRP 89.7 FM. Lucas dropped the recorder. No, the clerk didn't move. You were here. I was 8 years old. Exactly. Lucas stared at him. The world seemed to tilt. My parents. The clerk nodded. They worked here. Lucas remembered almost nothing about his father. He had always been told that his father died in an accident. But suddenly, memories began surfacing. A microphone, a red recording light, his father's hand on his shoulder, a dark hallway, a door, room 18, and screaming. Lucas grabbed his head. I remember, the clerk whispered. Then you remember what happened. Lucas saw it, a memory. 37 years earlier, he was 8 years old. He was sitting inside the radio station. His father was broadcasting. The building shook. People were screaming. Then the fire began. His father grabbed Lucas. They ran. But something was standing in the hallway. A man. Daniel Mercer. Except Daniel wasn't trying to escape. He was standing beside room 18, holding the door open. His father screamed, "Don't let him take the boy." Lucas remembered being pulled away. He remembered his father pushing him through a window. Then fire. Then darkness. Then nothing. Lucas opened his eyes. He was back inside the motel. The clerk was watching him. What happened to my father? The clerk looked down. He went back. Back where? Room 18. Lucas shook his head. Why? To bring someone out. Who? The clerk looked at him. You. A noise came from upstairs. 3 slow knocks. Lucas looked toward the staircase. The clerk whispered, "It's starting again." What is? The broadcast. The motel lights flickered. Every radio in the building switched on simultaneously. Static filled the lobby. Then, dozens of voices began speaking. Some crying, some screaming, some whispering. Then, one voice emerged above all the others. Lucas's father. Lucas. Lucas stepped toward the staircase. The clerk grabbed his arm. Don't. My father is up there. Your father isn't calling you. The voice came again. Lucas, please. Lucas looked at the clerk. How do you know? The old man's face became terrified. Because I've heard that voice before. The radios suddenly went silent. Then, every speaker whispered the same sentence. Open room 18. Lucas climbed the stairs. The clerk screamed after him. Lucas! He didn't stop. The staircase seemed longer than before. 10 steps, 20, 30. The walls began changing. Old photographs appeared. The radio station, the fire, his family. Every photograph showed Lucas. Every photograph showed him standing beside room 18. Then he reached the top. There was one door. Number 18. Lucas placed his hand on the knob. It was warm. From behind the door came his father's voice. "I'm sorry." Lucas closed his eyes. "I remember you." Silence. Then, "No, you don't." The door opened. Inside was the old radio station, exactly as it had looked in 1989. Smoke filled the room. The walls were burning. All the equipment flickered. And behind the microphone stood Lucas' father, or something wearing his face. Lucas couldn't move. His father smiled. "You came back." Lucas whispered, "Are you real?" The figure laughed. "Does it matter?" Lucas stepped backward. The figure pointed toward the microphone. "Sit down." "No." "You've already done this before." "No." The radio crackled. A red light turned on. On air. The figure leaned toward Lucas. 37 years ago, you were the last voice they heard. Lucas stared at him. "What?" "You were broadcasting when the fire started." "I was 8. "Exactly." The figure smiled. "And tonight?" The microphone slowly turned toward Lucas. "You're going to finish the broadcast." Lucas tried to run. The door slammed shut. The radio came alive. And Lucas heard his own voice coming through the speakers. "Good evening." Lucas stared at the microphone. He wasn't speaking. Yet his voice continued. "Tonight, another door will open." The room began filling with smoke. Lucas screamed, "Stop!" His voice came through the speakers again. "Please, don't leave." Then dozens of voices answered. "Please, don't leave." The figure behind the microphone disappeared. Lucas was alone. Or so he thought. A reflection appeared in the glass beside him. His reflection. But it wasn't copying his movements. It was smiling. Lucas stared at it. The reflection slowly raised one finger to its lips. Then it whispered, "Shh." The radio clock changed. 2:13 a.m. The red broadcast light became brighter. Lucas heard the final voice through the speakers. Daniel Mercer. "Now we know where their next voice comes from." Lucas looked toward the glass. His reflection was gone. And behind him stood 23 people, the victims of the 1989 fire, all staring at him, all with burned faces, all waiting. Then his father's voice whispered in his ear, "Don't turn around." Lucas slowly smiled because he finally understood. His father wasn't warning him, he was warning them. Lucas turned around, and every radio in the room screamed at once. The next morning, the police received an emergency call from Lucas's repair shop. The caller identifies himself as Lucas. He says, "I've been missing for 37 years." The police arrive. Lucas is sitting calmly at his workbench, alive, uninjured, and completely normal. But when an officer asks him what happened, Lucas looks directly into the security camera and smiles. Then he says, "Which Lucas are you looking for?" Behind him, the antique radio clicks on to 13 a.m. And somewhere inside the static, a little boy begins laughing. Wow. So now we have another Lucas who knows, maybe he was responsible for the fire in 1989. Thank you for listening. This was The White Raven. If you like the story, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like and notification buttons, share it with someone you think might also enjoy it, leave a comment. We love reading them. If you have a story and would like to share it with us, send it to thewhiteravenstories@gmail.com. This was The White Raven. Till next time.